Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a concept that honestly sounds a little bit like magic, but I promise you it is deeply grounded in hard, peer-reviewed science. What if I told you that spending just 10 minutes with a pen and paper could literally change the physical structure of how your brain handles stress? Kind of a bold claim, right? But we're going to look at the exact neurological mechanisms that make it happen. You're probably thinking, come on, can a simple pen really change my physical brain? It really does sound almost too good to be true, doesn't it? Well, the scientific consensus is a massive, resounding yes. After 40 years of rigorous research, scientists have absolute proof that this incredibly simple act of writing causes massive biological shifts within us. And the crazy part? We're talking about profound physical changes that happen without any alterations whatsoever to your diet or your exercise routine. Literally, the only variable is what you write down. Okay, let's dive into this, because the data here is absolutely staggering. Across multiple studies, researchers found that people who regularly journal actually end up visiting the doctor less often. Students who do it get noticeably better grades, but it also shows up in these totally unexpected physical ways. We're talking faster healing times from physical injuries, significantly better sleep quality, and get this, even stronger immune responses. All of that just from putting ink on a page. So how on earth does this actually work? To understand the how, we're going to break down the 4 neuroscientific pillars of journaling: naming, offloading, distancing, and story. And stick around, because by the end, we're going to turn all this science into a super easy 5-minute daily template you can use tonight. All right, let's jump right into mechanism 1, naming. To really grasp this first pillar, picture a fascinating 2007 study out of UCLA. Participants were shown photographs of fearful and angry faces. Now, Group 1 was told to just look at the faces. That's it. But Group 2, they were asked to pick a word for the emotion they saw. Just a simple label, like angry or afraid. It sounds like such a minor difference, but the brain scans were wild. Just picking a word actively calmed the amygdala, which is basically your brain's threat-detecting fire alarm. At the exact same time, labeling the emotion actually increased activity in the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex. That's the area right behind your forehead that acts like the brakes, helping to control your physical reactions. Researchers call this process affect labeling, and honestly, this brilliantly illustrates a completely counterintuitive truth about human psychology. You know, we usually assume that thinking about or naming our tough negative feelings is just going to make them louder and more overwhelming. Actually, scratch that. We tend to think it'll completely derail us. But the science shows the exact opposite is true. You feel something, you name it, and the feeling immediately loses its physical grip on your brain. Putting it into words literally turns the volume down. When you think about it, journaling is really just affect labeling stretched out across a page. Let's move on to mechanism 2, offloading, and see how this builds on what we just learned. So this mechanism tackles a deeply relatable problem. Our brains absolutely hate leaving things unfinished. You know that nagging feeling of an unanswered text message, an unpaid bill, or like an awkward conversation from last week? Those incomplete loops just stay running in the background of your mind, eating up your mental energy. In a really clever 2011 study called Consider It Done, researchers found that these unfinished tasks actually ruined people's performance on totally unrelated reading tests. The mental noise was just too loud. But, and here's the magic, when researchers asked them to write down a highly specific plan of exactly when, where, and how they tackle those tasks, the mental noise completely stopped. You're not actually doing the task right then, you're just moving it out of your working memory. Psychologists call this cognitive offloading. But here is the catch. A vague plan won't cut it. Your brain knows a fake intention from a real one, so you've got to be specific. And we can see a super practical application of this from a sleep lab study at Baylor University. Researchers split folks into 2 groups right before bed. One group wrote down everything they had already accomplished that day. The other group spent just 5 minutes writing a detailed to-do list for tomorrow. Well, the to-do list group, the ones actively offloading their future tasks onto paper, fell asleep significantly faster. In fact, the longer and more detailed those lists were, the faster their brains essentially shut down and allowed them to drop off to sleep. Okay, that brings us to mechanism 3, distancing. This mechanism is kind of like a psychological cheat code because it requires intentionally changing the pronouns you use for yourself. You might remember this famous pop culture moment. When NBA star LeBron James went on national TV to announce he was leaving Cleveland, he kept saying, "I wanted to do what was best for LeBron James." At first glance, that might sound, a bit arrogant. But Ethan Kross, a psychologist at the University of Michigan, proved across 7 different experiments that addressing yourself by your own name is a technique our brains fundamentally love. When participants coached themselves by name right before giving high-stress speeches with zero preparation, they walked in calmer, performed way better, and spent far less time beating themselves up afterward. It creates this massive mental buffer zone. And this buffer helps us bypass a really fascinating cognitive bias known as Solomon's paradox. The paradox goes like this. We're absolutely amazing at solving other people's problems. We see the answers so clearly when a friend calls us in distress, but we get completely, hopelessly stuck when dealing with our own stuff. By addressing yourself in the third person, using he, she, or your name, you literally trick your brain into viewing yourself from the outside. A 2017 study even showed that the moment people switch to their own name, brain stress signals drop within the very first second. This simple linguistic shift is the ultimate tool to keep your journaling from turning into just toxic rumination where you endlessly replay what went wrong.
Which leads us perfectly into our final pillar, mechanism 4, story.
Dan McAdams over at Northwestern University found that people who frame their life stories as bad turning to good, like a failure that taught them a crucial lesson or a devastating low point that ultimately led to something better, are remarkably happier and physically healthier. In a massive review of 177 people, the clearest physical health gains didn't come from just venting raw emotions. Instead, it happened when people transitioned away from purely descriptive words, like just passively listing what happened, and started using sense-making words. We're talking about words like realize, understand, because, and reason. They stopped just recording the facts and began actually making sense of them. And interestingly enough, those because words naturally pop up way more often when you write in the third person. It all just connects seamlessly. So, the crucial point is, how do we take all of this dense neuroscience and actually make it useful for you tonight? How do we synthesize naming, offloading, distancing, and story into one highly practical routine? Well, here is your incredibly simple nightly 5-minute template, bringing all 4 scientific pillars onto one single page. Step 1, scene. Write down a few lines about one specific event from today. Treat it like a scene in a movie, not a total summary of your day. Step 2, feeling. Name the specific feeling you had and take a guess at why it's there. Boom, there is your affect labeling or naming. Step 3, 5 to-dos. Write down 5 highly specific tasks to handle tomorrow. There's your cognitive offloading so you can sleep peacefully. Step 4, gratitude. Just write one small thing that went right. By writing out the scene and guessing the reasons behind your feelings, you're naturally incorporating distance and story. All 4 mechanisms completely activated in just 5 minutes. And to ground all this modern neuroscience in a bit of historical context, consider this amazing fact. The most influential journal in human history was never actually meant to be read by anyone. The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius wrote his private journal, which we now know as Meditations, while commanding armies during brutal wars and living through devastating plagues. He didn't write it for an audience. He wrote it simply to think more clearly, to steady himself, and to study his own mind. Thousands of years ago, he was utilizing the exact same psychological tools we've just been decoding today. But beyond the brain scans and the history, there's just a really beautiful personal layer to this practice. Having kept a journal myself, I can tell you the true beauty is being able to open it up and revisit a version of yourself you might have otherwise completely forgotten. The highs and the lows, kept safely somewhere outside of your active, flawed memory. It's really just about showing up and paying attention to yourself. And please remember, you absolutely do not have to do this perfectly every single day to reap the incredible biological benefits we've been talking about. Which leaves us with this final provocative thought. If you sit down with a pen for just 5 to 10 minutes tonight, your brain and body might not instantly thank you. The stress drop takes a minute to build, and the habit takes time to form. But looking at the undeniable science, will your future self thank you months from now? Grab a pen and some paper tonight, try the 4-step template, and find out for yourself. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep learning.